You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. The trend of tropical cyclones on either side of the world continues today, with Tropical Storm Eta making landfall in Vietnam, the formation of Tropical Storm Vamco, which could become a typhoon before it strikes the Philippines, the same areas that were affected by Goni 2 weeks ago or less, 1.5 weeks ago. And in the Atlantic, Eta still alive. It's not doing that well, but it could re-strengthen before it affects the coast of Florida for a second time towards the end of this week. We'll see how that goes. We might have a bit of confusion on tonight's stream because we've got Eta and Etau. You couldn't have scripted that really, could you? But this continues the seemingly endless streak of storms active, and there's hardly been I don't think we've had more than a week's break during the tropical season anywhere around the world since like June or July. Quite incredible. 10th of November, and here we are again on the universal clock, at least just past midnight and morning over there in the Western Pacific on the East Asian coast. My name is Nathan Foy. I'm joined by our team for this coverage, which is simulcasted on Force 13 Philippines on Facebook, so hello to everyone there as well. With me I have Ike, Christian, Ethan and Strat. Good evening.
Good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world.
So we've got 3 storms that are all threatening different land areas today, and we of course should mention Cuba as well, because that's the area that's got the tropical storm watches for Eta. Even though the storm is, I think it's still, well no, actually I think it is closer to Cuba now, at least for the time being, before headed back towards the Florida coast. But, well, I'll let Strat open up on this. Which storm would you like to start with today?
Well, we obviously have, Vamco, Ulysses, bearing down on the Philippines again. While Etau is of course going to be bringing around another 300 to 500 at most millimeters rainfall to central Vietnam, Ulysses right here has the chance to become a significant typhoon if it goes to the upper end of the forecast intensities, although fortunately the expected intensity has gone down since about 12 hours ago quite substantially due to a more southern track. I think the real story, though, is that because it's a broader system, you're going to be seeing some more substantial rainfall over a broader area, and the southward shift in the track means a potential first strike in very similar areas to where Raleigh made landfall just a couple weeks ago in Catanduanes and Bicol.
Now this is the warning map again from PAGASA, and we're seeing another one of these maps way too soon. Don't forget the what even was that last storm just now? Of course, Etau. I forget what the Philippine name was now already. It was so go ahead.
It was Ulysses.
No, this is the current one. It was the T name and I've forgotten it now. Tonyo, that's the one. And that also produced some warnings. And now we've got this one as well, which is producing Signal 1 warnings there for the northern part of Samar, the northern part of Masbate, into the Bicol region. Catanduanes again under those warnings. Let's take a look at the Atlantic, I think we're going to here, or is it? Nope, this is still the Western Pacific. Okay, you can see both of these storms here on the infrared satellite loop. Etau looking decent, making landfall in Vietnam right now. Yet again, another storm making landfall in Vietnam, another massive deluge of rainfall for one area there. Landfall zone appears to be not far from Nha Trang, I believe it is. Sort of getting towards southern Vietnam. And you can see there Vamco, a much larger system. And just to reiterate, two names on that one. Vamco is the international name, and Ulysses is the Philippine name. Let's look at the Atlantic then. This is how Eta looks today. And to be honest, it's not looking that bad. Oh, they've just moved the floater to the plains now, so we're going to lose that pretty soon. But Ethan, any thoughts on Eta today?
Well, just looking on the satellite imagery of Eta, over the past few hours, it's had a big convective burst over its center. So perhaps more intensification is on the way.
Yep.
But the storm has shrunk significantly.
It's tiny.
So it would not take much for this storm to probably intensify up to hurricane status. And looking on some of the major models, they are locking onto that now. And in particular, the HWR of Pulse
Naturally.
Category 3.
Naturally. It's been saying that for a while, to be fair, but looking at its composition now, it's lost that huge amount of convection that it had, the massive bands. It almost took a subtropical appearance earlier, and now it's getting the cloud tops back as it enters slightly warmer waters there near the Yucatan Channel. You never know, could be another landfall in Cuba before it
If it
moves north.
deviates off to the south again, maybe, but it is looking like it's going to at least stall off that motion, and then eventually turn back towards the north as we head into Wednesday, and then weaken pretty substantially. The track forecast is west from yesterday, so they're no longer, at least initially, expecting a second landfall in Florida, but they are also expecting it to become a tropical depression by the weekend now, as conditions will be far more hostile for the storm heading into this weekend.
And a reminder there that tropical storm watches are in effect, or at least they were before the update that's just come in from the National Hurricane Center. And 50 miles an hour and 995 is what they're going with. Is that what we ran with just now? Something like that. Very close.
I think it is.
And no changes to the watches and warnings, so we did alright with that one. Don't have to change anything on our bottom bar. So tropical storm watch in effect for the western part of Cuba. Looking at National Hurricane Center forecast cone, quite a bit of uncertainty still in that. The end of the cone, just a massive sphere almost there by Friday, Saturday. Very uncertain track.
The steering currents are going to allow this to gain latitude from, this upcoming morning, on the East Coast time, basically to the end of the forecast period. So this thing's going to settle down, where it is right now for the most part for about a day, with, some light dips to the south and try to guide back to the north. But it's not going to just, accelerate 20 miles an hour like a Nate from a couple of years did, into the Gulf Coast. This thing's going to very slowly drift northward and probably, as time goes on, start to lose a lot more of its deep convection. A lot of the global models, like the GFS, for example, and the European, start to really strip this thing of any convective activity by the time you reach Friday morning. And that wouldn't be surprising whatsoever considering the atmospheric conditions it's going to be encountering. So if it reaches any secondary peak, it's really going to be in the next 24 to at most 36 hours when it's still a bit further south in these more favorable conditions, and then it's going to start to slowly degrade over time.
Gotta say though, that wind field's getting pretty close to Cuba. I'm a little bit surprised if not just that western tip issued a warning there.
I'll be honest, that's the first time I've seen that cone, and what?
It's uncertainty right there.
Yeah.
Let's get the wide shot of the Atlantic just now as well. Here it is. So Eta just trailing off the edge of the screen there. But we want to point out what's going on out in the open Atlantic. A huge front there, Ethan. And you've been watching this fairly closely. And an area of interest attached to it at the top there. 97L with a 80% chance in 48 hours.
Yep, they've actually given it 90% in 5 days. So And just judging off of the satellite imagery, the front that is attached to the system right now, which is the only thing keeping it post-tropical, is barely coupled to the system.
Yes,
So
you can see it.
It would not surprise me if this becomes a subtropical storm in 12 hours, or perhaps as
Even
early
a-
as tonight.
Even a tropical storm, maybe.
I'm still a bit uncertain about that.
I think it could at some point, but that's got a future clearly, and that would be yet another named storm. Going even further into the Greek alphabet, the next name on the list is Theta.
And then there's also a Caribbean Sea area of interest as well. That one could also form. The European model in particular has a system forming in 120 hours.
It's insane. Everything, it felt okay. Gamma, and then Delta, and then Eta. No, Zeta. I even forgot one. And then Eta, and now maybe another one. That's just an
And now
insane
after
late
that-
season. Really is.
This, yeah, really is insane.
Just like checking the latest GFS run from 18Z that came in about 2 hours ago. Depicts another system as well, Ethan. I don't know if you spoke about this one that passes north of the Leeward Islands and Puerto Rico and has a short life before moving into Hispaniola. That could be yet another one that just uses up another name.
Maybe a potential short-lived system, but at this point, I probably wouldn't mark it.
We're talking about weekend into next week for that one. But something interesting to watch again. But a very energetic Atlantic shot still. Strad, any comment?
Well, I mean, we talked about it a while ago, and we said if the season really wanted to push its storm totals up late season, you'd want to see some of these more not as many Caribbean and main development region systems or Gulf of Mexico area disturbances, but these kind of non-tropical or subtropical disturbances that developed out in the open Atlantic and rack up those names. And with this 97L right here, the next name is Theta, if I'm not mistaken. If we get a couple more like that, that's where you really pad the numbers on the named storms, even if none of them are particularly powerful or impacting land too substantially.
I must say, Ada's appearance is very fascinating when you look at the visible there. Its influence, the rotation around it is absolutely enormous, covers almost the whole Gulf and the Western Caribbean. But the actual storm itself is tiny within that.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday we were talking about how broad the system was, particularly north and east of the center. So that's why even though this thing was passing, through the Florida Keys, we were seeing, very substantial thunderstorm activity north and east of the center through Miami-Dade and Broward County and in the Bahamas. It's basically the opposite story today, to where even though the broader circulation is very large, the only real thunderstorm activity is really pronounced at the exact center and short distances away from it. You may see seeing some, showers and light thunderstorm activity further off to the east and north of the center. You can see that kind of trailing band over central Cuba there on that satellite imagery. But the bulk of the storm is now associated right at the center.
Let's take some questions then. We're really directed by our viewers for this particular stream. There's 3 storms to talk about. Start your message with Force13 all in text in our YouTube chat, and I think our Facebook team are there to take your questions in text on our Force 13 Philippines stream. So here's the first question. Is there a chance that Eta could become a Category 2 or a major hurricane again?
Personally, I don't think so, given what short time frame it's got left, according to the NHC, of course. It's just basically forecast to dissipate from here on.
Yeah, there are a couple of models that try to say in the next 24 hours it'll shoot up for some reason back to, high in Category 1, trying to reach Category 2. But the large bulk consensus is that this thing will find the secondary peak at strong tropical storm or maybe minimal Category 1 strength in
But
about 36 hours from now at most, and then start to degrade off as it starts to move northward into more hostile conditions as we head later into the week. So it would have to pull a surprising act to get anything further than a minimal Category 1 at this point.
But I am impressed by its appearance in the last few hours, convection building. So,
Yeah, certainly, but its issues that it's going to have is one right now, at least, to intensify, any more than a more gradual pace over the next 30 to 36 hours. The fact that it's so broad, even though the center is pretty tight, the circulation is obviously very broad. You can see that on the visible imagery. It's going to make it a bit harder in that regard. And on top of that, really, as soon as we reach Wednesday morning, that's when conditions are going to really start to taper off forward substantially, enough for it to really subsist and then slowly kind of fall apart as we head towards the weekend. But if it doesn't do anything too substantial, it's only 50 miles an hour right now. If it doesn't get back up to, say, 70 miles an hour within the next day, it'd be hard pressed to get much further than that.
okay, Hugh asks, what do we think Ulysses will be a very strong typhoon located directly in the path of the storm?
Not anymore.
It could possibly strengthen to Category 2 to Category 3 before landfall.
I mean, Ethan,
Yeah.
I struggle to get on board with you, really, because this is the Western Pacific and almost anything can happen.
Fair enough, but models have been trending toward the south, more of a landfall in the central Philippines rather than Luzon. And the farther south this storm goes, the more land interaction it's going to have, and the weaker it'll be.
Yeah, if you want to use a recent comparison, unlike Raleigh, which formed well out in the Philippine Sea and had several days with no land interaction, Ulysses right here at least is already having some of its convection and circulation interacting with portions of southern and central areas of the Philippines, and it's generally going to move west-northwest and eventually a bit more westward. But because the track forecast has shifted further south from more central Luzon towards southern Luzon and maybe even near Catanduanes and Bicol again, it's going to have less time to really get its act together. And although it's in very favorable conditions to get up to hurricane strength or typhoon intensity from at least where it is right now, it's very hard pressed to see anything as major as a Category 4 per se. But that doesn't degrade any of the risk that the system brings, not just from its winds, but also from the rainfall forecasts, which are expected to be above 300 millimeters over a
Really?
wide land area.
Now, for what it's worth, regarding its intensity, the HWRF, which usually goes off the deep end, is calling for, I think, a Category 1 landfall to become a Category 1 in 24 hours just before striking Catanduanes once again. Obviously less than ideal, but it could be, it could have been a Category 3 or 4, but it looks like it's going to be much weaker than that. Just time. It's much against possibilities that it strengthens beyond Category 1. A couple of models do suggest it could happen, and actually the HWRF, amongst others, suggesting that it'll happen after passing the Philippines, which is obviously bad news for Vietnam once again.
Yeah, the difference with this system, at least past the Philippines, unlike Raleigh, is that because it isn't at that same upper echelon of intensity, its structure won't necessarily be as obliterated per se by the landmass that is the Philippines. But also in the South China Sea and the Western Philippine Sea, conditions are going to be generally more favorable for a storm to at least maintain its intensity or try to gain a little bit of steam compared to South Raleigh, which was continued degradation of the storm because of high wind shear and drier air in the area. So this does have the chance, at least, to hold some of its intensity and be at least a strong tropical storm by the time it reaches Vietnam. And again, a similar area to where Tau is making landfall right now, which is relatively similar area to where Raleigh made landfall just a couple weeks prior.
Which is a very similar area to where Malawi made landfall. And a very similar area to where a lot of other storms have made landfall. I've forgotten the names of half of them already. It's been ridiculous. These things do happen though. Sometimes you get years that really pack the storms late on that affect just these areas. it's been a while, I think, but you know, everyone knows me as a historian. I've looked through some of the very old seasons, 1912, 1915, both extremely bad seasons late on in the year, and it sort of reminds me of that a little bit. 10 typhoon landfalls in one of those seasons in 3 months, September to December. Let's take some more questions. Will Vamco hit Quezon or Aurora? That's still a possibility at this point. It's definitely within the cone.
I will note that the further south this shifts, the less likely to say an area like Quezon,
Yep.
which is around Manila, is going to see.
Well, I mean, it extends further south as well.
It does, but areas up there, as the track shifts further south, more towards Catanduanes and Bicol again, you could obviously get impacts, but because the system's broader and not expected to be as strong, it won't be as much of a substantial wind threat per se, as much as a prolonged rainfall flooding concern. So, obviously stay up to date and make sure your preparations are intact, especially if you're in a flood-prone area. Because you can already see, outer bands from this reaching towards Bicol right now. Some of those cloud tops which indicate convective activity aren't really that far from Luzon already, and will start to spread into the area in pretty short order. We're not talking about a storm that's 5 days away. We're talking about a storm that's about 2 days from landfall at most right now.
People are asking me what province it will make landfall in. I mean, it is too far to say that. If it went in a straight line, and don't take this for granted because storms do not move in straight lines, but if it did, you'd be looking probably at a landfall near enough exactly where Goni did.
Yeah, I mean, the JTWC basically flatlines as it makes it move due west through all the Philippines, just north of Catanduanes into northern Bicol and then south of Manila.
North of that?
Yeah, so they're north of that, but the track consensus and forecasts have continued to shift south. They were substantially further north yesterday, and it looks like this is going to get shifted south again. So, and I will note one of the differences as well, though, is this wind field is going to be broader. So even if this passes, say, into southern Bicol instead, which is definitely possible, areas like Manila, up towards the northern areas of Luzon, will likely still get gale conditions despite that. So even though it won't be as strong of a system, the fact that it's larger, especially in its wind field, means that more areas like, say, Quezon and the Manila area would still get gale conditions, even if this moves substantially further south of the current forecast.
Throwing it back to the Atlantic, a question there. Is there also a chance that Eta turns back into the west coast of Florida near Naples?
Yes, there actually is.
There is.
Albeit
There is, yes.
a very small chance, but that's entirely possible.
Well, it would be an extremely small chance since it's some distance outside of the cone. Having said
it's certainly
that,
far less likely than yesterday.
having said that, chances of tropical storm winds, something like 15% though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for an area in Florida, let's say on the peninsula, at highest population, let's say if this went to the outer edge of the cone where the center could be in about 5 days, you're looking more for Tampa than Naples.
Yeah.
But even so, we're seeing a more pronounced westward model guidance now, that this thing's going to kind of wander around in the Gulf of Mexico and slowly decay as we head into the weekend and later this week. So I'd still keep an eye out across, Florida and the eastern half of the Gulf Coast for general rainfall, rougher surf, rip currents, and some more gusty winds with squall lines. But it looks like we're in a situation where the storm's going to more decay as it drifts northward and generally weak steering currents, then move, directly into an area as a tropical storm strength system.
We've just got some little bit of breaking news here.
Okay.
We just got a ASCAP pass on Invest 97L.
Uh-oh.
And it has gotten winds of 50 miles per hour. It's got a few 45 knot barbs in it. So, potentially 60 miles an hour already. Given that ASCAP often underestimates a little bit.
Oh, no.
Well, I think
it's not a surprise that it's that strong, really. What I can tell you, just looking at the ASCAP pass here, it looks like it's still not ready to be called.
Yeah,
No.
I think the thing to note for people is that this isn't like, 97L isn't not a tropical cyclone because it doesn't have the winds to be designated a tropical storm. It's because it's still, frontal and not detached enough to be declared a
Yep.
subtropical or tropical cyclone yet. It
ASCAT,
definitely has the wind speed called one.
ASCAT shows it absolutely is still frontal at this point.
It's close though.
Getting close. It'll have a name, probably tomorrow.
I hope it doesn't.
I think it will. There was plenty more questions that I just need to try and get to here. Eta isn't that hard pressed to get strong. Circulations with less of a conservation of angular momentum have an easier time battling shear because of the broadness of it. Any thoughts?
Its size in this case, the core again is relatively small with the most concentrated thunderstorm activity right on the center. But the fact that its circulation is so kind of strung out from its history over Central America and other land interaction with Cuba and Florida, kind of stretching it alongside prior wind shear impacts.
I don't
It's
know.
not like this thing is going to just randomly, tighten up like a ballerina dance.
But it
or,
could, Strad. It's
figure skater.
it's a compact system there. I can see that tightening up.
I could see it try to, but it's not like, anyone's really particularly expecting this to stay randomly go in the next 30 hours or so before conditions become far more hostile and just shoot up straight towards major hurricane status. The consensus forecast does call for some substantial
No, it would have to be
intensification.
sustained strengthening, which is very unlikely in this position.
Yeah, we're looking at a storm that can reach towards hurricane strength. The consensus forecast is just shy of that right now, and could try to break back into hurricane strength briefly. But it's not like we're going to see this system explode upwards in intensity unless, really fringe models that are significant outliers are correct for some reason.
Is there a chance that PAGASA will raise signal number 4 in the Philippines?
No.
No.
Yeah, it would have to be very strong.
You could see more widespread signal 2 warnings, though, in part because of its expected gale wind field, though.
Signal
I think
2,
that is,
maybe some small parts of signal 3 in some places when it gets near. Our own Wyatt asks our thoughts on the chances of a northwest Florida, southern Alabama impact for Eta.
If any impacts are going to occur there, it's probably just going to be gusty winds at times and heavy rainfall, because sea surface temperatures go off a cliff the more north that Eta gets. So the stronger it, so if the storm wants to be really strong and wants to be a hurricane, it has to stay farther south.
And
Yeah.
it's about to turn north very soon as well, actually.
How fast is Invest 97 separating from the front? What is the reasonable maximum strength that it could attain, and the chances of it forming either tonight or tomorrow?
Regarding 97L, it's close to detaching, but it's pretty certain that it'll become a subtropical or even a tropical cyclone tomorrow. And I'd say the reasonable ceiling for this would probably be a minimal hurricane, probably.
Gosh. I know
I mean-
people have been comparing it a bit to Vince, but different time of year.
I'd honestly say a storm to compare it to would be Pablo of last year.
Oh my goodness.
That would probably be a better one, in my opinion, just because the expectations have changed. This isn't really expected right now, at least anymore, to try to drift towards Iberia. It is expected to unwind a bit as it turns north, and I'm pretty sure that would be east of the Azores at this point, is the consensus, in between the Azores and the Canary Islands. As it turns northward there, it's expected to kind of lose itself and wind down. But considering it's already at least 45 knots, you're at a situation where it could try to reach up towards minimal hurricane strength before it starts to slow down and just unwind itself.
Anything but Pablo is all I can say about that one. Checking back to the Western Pacific again, and we've had a few questions regarding that, about Vamco. First of all, how large is it? I've not taken a look at the wind field, but I imagine it's a fairly sizable one. ASCAT certainly found a fairly sizable one earlier today, but I don't have numbers. So I'll see if we can get some info on that. Also, whether Vamco will surely move westward, whether there's no chance of a recurve.
No, I haven't seen any indications from any computer models this is going to randomly just, curve off to the north and east and avoid moving into the Philippines. There was some talk a week ago that this thing would try to, as it develops, curve northward and be more of a threat towards Japan than the Philippines. But there's an extremely high degree of certainty with the low time frame left that this is going to go straight into the Philippines again. And to answer that question about the wind field size, as of a few hours ago, in the northeast and southeast quadrants, gale force winds extended 130 nautical miles from the center. So you're looking towards 200 kilometers. Would note that that's the size that Goni or Raleigh had at its largest size before making landfall in the Philippines.
Wow.
And that's expected to continue to grow. By the time this thing makes landfall, it's expected to have in its northeastern quadrant gale winds extending up to 250 nautical miles from the center. So this thing's going to grow in size for its gale winds too. Not like this is going to just stay in size right now for how far those winds are reaching. And that's why areas that are substantially further north from the center than, say they were from Raleigh as it came to the Philippines, would get gale conditions in a situation where they weren't getting gale conditions from Raleigh.
Now, if you look at the image here at the moment, you can see a trail of clouds moving up from Eta, which is currently making landfall, all the way up south of the Japanese islands, and that is pretty much the boundary between the high pressure ridge to the north over the coast of China into the Korean peninsula, and that's the main reason these storms are going further south. I think also aiding Vamco's trend southwards might even be the fact that Eta is there as well to the west, and the storm's being drawn to that area of weakness. But nonetheless, the high pressure is pretty strong there and pushing down. It does at this time of year generally. You very rarely get recurving storms this late in the season. You might get one that tries to do a recurve and then hits the high pressure buffer and just gets stopped in its tracks and dies out at sea. It's not going to do that either, though, unfortunately. Let's see what else we've got here, because we're taking questions about this whole discussion. Can the disturbance in the Caribbean be similar to Delta, Zeta, and Eta?
Well, that disturbance is a fair way out at this
That's
point.
the voice
we don't
of
have
Kay.
much certainty on it.
Good
Hello.
evening to you.
Good evening. This disturbance is a long way out. We don't have a great deal of certainty with it. But looking at the conditions, Eta might have introduced some dry air to it as it moved through Cuba and brought dry air down from the Gulf of Mexico. There's expected to be a favourable MJO pulse in the next few days that could help to remove some of that dry air. But at this point, if there isn't dry air that's drawn into circulation, if it forms, then it has the ability to get all the way up to major hurricane status, unfortunately. But that's still very uncertain, and it could easily be a weak mess that dissipates shortly after it forms.
A question from Ding Dong Vlogs, and thanks very much for your support during this stream. Will Vamco hit Albi? Will it intensify to Typhoon? Probably a yes to both, if you ask me right now. Not a guarantee yet, but I would say it's more likely than not. Don't know if anyone else has a comment on that at all.
No, not for me.
Where exactly was he asking?
Albi, which is in the Bicol region. It'll be very close to where the storm makes landfall.
Well, I presume it's likely to go near there if it's the currently projected.
What storm has
Landfall.
had the most land in its cone of uncertainty this hurricane season? That's a good question. I'm not sure we have the answer to that. If you think it's going to be Ada, then surely there's a storm that's had more land in their cone than that.
I'd say Laura's had more land.
Laura?
It went across the entirety of the Greater Antilles, past the Lesser Antilles, and then went into the United States.
Oh, I suppose if you're talking about a whole track, yes. Yes. Could 97L impact the UK? Well, Kay, you are here along with me. Your thoughts?
And me, I'm here
And,
as
oh,
well.
Christian's still there as well.
Well, the
Christian
model
still
guidance I've
exists, I'm
seen
sorry.
seems to want to take it south of the UK into Spain and
Yes.
southern France as a post-tropical system. But before it turns post-tropical, it could impact the Azores and Madeira Islands.
It
And
certainly
of
could.
course,
That's
I
something to
believe
watch out.
Leslie was the first storm to significantly affect Madeira in the island's history, only 2 years ago.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like
So
2
it'd
years.
certainly be interesting if it got hit for the first time in twice
Here's
so
another
soon after the first one.
pertinent question. How small is Eta's central thunderstorms in relation to Marco in 2008? Marco was probably about half the size of this, or less.
Well, Marco's gale force wind radius was 30 miles, I think. No, sorry, the diameter was 30 miles across.
Diameter. It was tiny.
Yeah.
There was another storm that was really tiny a while back. Oh, what was it? I think wasn't Beryl of 2018, was it?
No.
I can't think. But there was one a while back that was really, really small. Can Eta rapidly intensify within the next 30 hours? Now, I guess we should explain once again the definition of rapid intensification. Okay.
The rapid intensification is defined by the National Hurricane Center as an increase in wind speed of 25 knots in 24 hours.
Do you think that could happen?
It would be very unusual if it did happen. It appears on water vapor imagery that Eta's developed a moisture shield, but that could equally just be high-level outflow covering mid-level dry air.
Okay.
So it's sort of a Gonzalo situation earlier in the year. It could become a hurricane, but it equally could just go poof.
Ethan, we'll be going to you shortly, but more questions just for the moment. Has Eta made this year hyperactive?
Yes.
Has
We
it?
just recently passed the
It's
limit
done
of
that.
hyperactivity.
That's
Oh, it's
amazing.
done it. Wow.
It also produced the fifth highest ace total on record for the first 9 days of November.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, there's been one or two questions about something that we can't ignore, and Ethan is on the case. As soon as I can get the image loaded on my screen, and first I've got to find it in my massive drop-down menu, so pardon me for this. Ethan, go ahead.
Well, right on cue. The Southern Hemisphere looks to be wanting to get into some of the action. And here is Invest 92S, I think it's called.
Yep.
91 or 92. And this looks to be probably the Southern Hemisphere's first tropical cyclone of the season. Most models are on board with the system actually becoming a hurricane-strength system. In addition to that, we're also looking at a cyclone also developing as the system pushes south towards the southwest, somewhere in this vicinity, around here, potentially. Mateo France is giving this a low chance of development. They've also given 92S a moderate
You
chance
can
of
see it
development.
there, yeah. That's the system, I think.
It's in its beginning stages of it, but
Yeah.
by this weekend, we could be seeing two tropical cyclones simultaneously in the Southwest Indian Ocean.
So that means we'll probably do more coverage. I don't know. If people want us to cover that storm, we will. And rumblings even of the North Indian Ocean later on in the month as well, but nothing concrete on that just yet. Let's see if we can take some more questions. Will Vamco be more like Malawi or Vong Phong? Vong Phong rapidly intensified, but it's smaller than this, wasn't it? I believe it was.
Also a completely different time of year with cooler sea surface temperatures.
Well, it's fairly warm all year round. I'm not sure how different they would have been back in May. And let's see here again. Will Vamco have any major impact in La Union area? That is on the western coast, and there could be rainfall impacts. I would expect that winds will be limited. But this could have more widespread or wide-ranging rainfall impacts overall, maybe. Let me just double check rainfall expectations to give people a little idea of how much to expect according to the latest model runs at least, which, you know, aren't always fully correct, but it'll give you an idea. And it is talking about widespread rainfall really across the whole of Luzon and also Mindoro. You're looking at least 200 millimeters widespread, and some areas above 300, 400 even. And again, it's going to be those locations that are the center of Goni tracked over pretty much. You're talking about Catanduanes, Camarines, into Quezon, all getting over 250 millimeters on the projection. That's 10 inches. So another very wet storm. Just a little indicator right now. Eta on the left hand side, which is making landfall in Vietnam right now, looks to be expecting to produce a further around 150 millimeters of rain. And then unfortunately the latest model indications are showing that that Vamco will deliver quite large amounts of rain to central and maybe northern Vietnam next week. So that rumbles on. The typhoon train, it would appear to be at this point.
Hasn't Vietnam suffered enough?
Yeah, you would have thought.
Yeah.
So there's a wider shot just now. Let's see if we have some more questions. Start your message with 413 all in text on the YouTube chat. Our Philippine team are there as well for our simulcast on Force 13 Philippines on Facebook. If you've not seen that, our team do great updates over there as well. Can Invest 97L become a hurricane? Kay thinks it might have a chance.
Well,
Christian?
the HWRF earlier was going for it, but
It
it's
was?
completely dropped it on the latest one.
Oh, okay.
Basically, they've decided it's going to be subtropical, and they've also shown that there could be as much as 45 knots of shear in this over the system, which is not going to allow it to strengthen very easily.
No.
No, and if it's headed towards the UK, so I've heard, I don't think it will be either. Subtropical at most.
But don't forget, when this thing blows up into an extratropical cyclone, if it moves further north, wind shear is pretty good for extratropical cyclones.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it shouldn't become a repeat of the 1987.
no, of course not.
Well, definitely not.
Well, that happened in October, and it's November, so it couldn't possibly be a repeat.
No, it can't.
Will the North Indian Ocean animation be one of the earliest for us? That's much later on down the line. I couldn't possibly comment. Sometimes you can get storms right at the end of December. I remember that happened, I think, in 2011. My first real year tracking that basin. Right at the end of the year, December 26th, I think it was. Some questions there about Jamaica. Can Jamaica expect to see any effects from that potential system? So it's too early to call that one just yet. But I imagine there's going to be some significant rainfall if anything comes of it.
Well, the GFS is currently indicating that the precursor low will have formed within 5 days, but not necessarily developed. In fact, the GFS is the main GFS isn't doing anything with it at all. Throughout the entire run, it's not very happy about it really. But then if you go to the models, the ensemble, GFS ensemble, I'm just bringing it up now for reference. It has multiple systems showing up. So, just going back, yes. A couple of model systems form it within 5 days. In fact, 2 members have a hurricane within 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then it moves generally west-northwestward, which would bring rain impacts to Jamaica, yes. A lot of models are developing it, a lot of members rather are developing it as it moves into the West Caribbean proper, couple making a significant hurricane out of it. Some of them are moving slowly just off the north coast of Honduras, which is the last thing that part of the world needs.
Yep.
And then eventually moving into to the Yucatan Peninsula, Belize or Mexico and onwards. There's one member that for some reason is going very bizarre off in the middle of nowhere, but then there's a hint that even longer range the season won't have died after these AOIs. There's still stuff showing up and forming, and it's just not a pretty picture.
We can see more rapid scan imagery that we've got now on Eta. Part of the convective area is moving over the western part of Cuba now. Massive dryness on the western side of the storm. Still relative moisture on the east, although still a few dry patches, especially the further away from the storm you get. But okay, its movement right now, I mean, might be a little bit nervy on the coast of Cuba.
Looking at the latest imagery of it, it's still moving southwest. Its CDO is over the coast of Cuba right now. It means they're probably experiencing tropical storm conditions there, or close to experiencing tropical storm conditions. I don't believe there's any warnings out for that.
There's no tropical storm warnings, just the watch, and I think they should issue a warning.
They
might well do in a couple of hours, because it's still moving southwestward at this time and it doesn't show a sign of turning soon.
Yeah.
Can we see if there's another area of interest in the Western Pacific Basin? Let's do a little whistle-stop tour around the world then, I suppose. So this is the Atlantic now. We've seen that quite a few times this evening. Let's take a look at the Eastern Pacific. To be predicted, it's pretty quiet. I think Ethan mentioned earlier there's a 10% chance there somewhere. But I'm not seeing it personally. So the Western Pacific, and the questioner asked about this, looking out for another area of interest. I'm honestly not seeing anything of note out there. I wouldn't designate anything east of Vamco. Not yet. A model guidance not showing anything on the radar anytime soon either. There's a look at the South Pacific, if you wanted to see that. It's getting towards that time of year again. More convective cloud tops there, but nothing of significance. The North Indian Ocean looks like this. Very interesting colours. Unfortunately, we don't have animated imagery of the Southern Indian Ocean, at least not yet. But if something did form, we would. And just a little look at the sea surface temperatures right now as well to help us along. You can see the Eastern Pacific still fairly warm off the coast of Mexico. You know, there could be a little surprise late season cyclone, but usually by this point the season is pretty much over. The Atlantic's still fairly warm in the Gulf, the Southern Gulf and the Western Caribbean, where Eta is right now. Current temperatures around 28 degrees. Moving on over to the Western Pacific there. South China Sea, much cooler. So storms aren't going to get that much luck over there now. But still the Philippine Sea, that is the powerhouse of the world tropics, really. And still pushing 30 degrees Celsius where the current Storm Vamco is. And now looking back at the water vapor imagery on Eta. We've got 3 storms active right now. We're here for another 10 minutes. Take questions. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. Eta is projected to turn sharply to the north. What causes such a sudden change in direction as drastic as that? These are quite exceptional circumstances almost, Kay. The steering's been very complicated.
Steering has been weak, although it's been moving faster than you would expect for contested steering currents. What it's sandwiched between two areas of high pressure at the moment, and that's been generating shear over it. But a trough is going to come in from the continental US, I believe, and it will open a way for it to move northwards.
Yep. Someone's just asked, any thoughts on Rene?
It's not exactly appropriate to have a look at
That feels like last
storms
season
from the
at this
past,
point.
especially disappointing ones.
Oh dear.
Oh dear, there's some more interesting questions. When do we expect to release the Atlantic hurricane season animation for this year? Well, usually we do it historically. When you look at the dates, it's been sometime between December 4th and December 18th or something along those lines. This year it will be whenever the storms stop.
So probably 2022.
Yeah, December. But there we go. There we have it. Let's just reiterate some of the information from the National Hurricane Center as of 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Eta. 50 miles per hour, pressure of 995 millibars. Tropical storm watch still in effect for the western part of Cuba. The provinces there extending to La Habana towards the east. Tropical storm force winds extending outward up to 140 miles from the center. Expected to deliver an additional 1 to 2 inches of rainfall with maximum storm totals of 15 in the Bahamas. Cuba, an additional 3 to 5 inches with maximum storm totals of 25. Central and southern Florida, an additional 1 to 3 inches with isolated maximums of 18. They've not mentioned other parts of Florida yet, probably out of uncertainty more than anything. Flash flooding and river flooding will be possible in Cuba, along with landslides in areas of higher terrain. Additional flash flooding is possible across inundated urban areas of southeast Florida today. And of course you've got the winds still across the Florida Keys, south and central Florida, and surf, of course. The next advisory will be at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. Now over to the Philippines, where the latest update was from 5 a.m. I don't think they've started 3-hour updates yet on what they've named Tropical Storm Ulysses. Expecting strong winds, Tropical Cyclone Wind Signal 1 in effect over more localities in Calabazon, Bicol region and eastern Visayas. More areas in these regions will be placed under Warning Signal 1 in the next bulletin. So they've already confirmed that. Signal 2 may be hoisted in some areas as early as tonight. And they're expecting that, based on the intensity forecast, that they're expecting the highest signal for this storm will be a 3. Let me just see if they have any rainfall expectations actually. I'm not seeing that there, but more of what we've already seen really in the previous storms that have moved over. Not quite the winds in this one, I wouldn't think. I mean, it's not going to beat Goni. We can say that with utmost certainty. But rainfall could be a bigger factor in this one. We don't have any more questions, do we? Yes, what's the expected effects for Metro Manila? So again, we could be looking probably Signal 2 conditions. Signal 3 if it goes very worst case scenario, but probably you'll get a 2. Heavy rainfall, 200 millimeters or so at least. That's it really. Was Paulette the only storm to have a low pressure in 3 different months? Well, it was a low I mean, we marked it after the fact that it spanned 3 months technically, because it was, what was it, August 30th or something to September to October 1st. It's ridiculous. Paulette lasted pretty long. Ada has formed
Time
a
it wasn't
small.
alive.
Sorry.
I'm just saying half the time Paulette was
Yeah.
around, it wasn't alive.
Ada has formed a small CDO feature of the center. Do we think that it could form a pretty small core and take advantage of the loop current and the low shear environment?
Well, I would say that it has already formed a small core. It's got a very large area of influence, but the core itself looks, at least according to satellite imagery, to have condensed significantly. However, at this time of year, the loop current doesn't extend very far into the Gulf of Mexico, but Eta's managing to get to it still. Yeah, it's not going to be there for that long unless the models are wrong and it continues to go southwards, and then if it does keep going southwards, it could get to hurricane status once more before it moves off to the north and ultimately
was the
weakens
wrong
into
button.
a depression.
What was that just there? Any chance that we will get to Kappa?
Yes.
Without
I'm gonna
hesitation there.
I'm gonna say yes, but I really hope not. That's just personal.
So we could see both the current AOIs form, and that would be 2 names, and then the name after that would be Kappa, and we can't rule out December.
It's just ridiculous. Do we think that Ada's path is the weirdest one of the season?
I definitely think so. Yes, it's just been a massive zigzag, up until recently. But yeah, that's my.
I mean, stalling, zigging, zagging, zigging again, and now it's going to go due north.
But you remember these long-term models, they had something like this, although it was stronger. For it to go all over the place. You remember 2 weeks ago when the long-range models were saying there'd be a major hurricane running around Cuba and the Caribbean Sea. The track has been believable from that, only much weaker, thankfully.
Yeah, you're right. It was supposed to do some strange things, but it just moved further north to do those strange things, and therefore it wasn't over the West Caribbean. It was over the Florida Straits.
Indeed, and there it is, still moving towards the south, and the main question overnight tonight will be whether that movement, how long that movement will continue for. Will the western tip of Cuba get tropical storm force winds? Will they issue a tropical storm warning? And then, once it starts turning, will it be straight due north, or will it get slingshotted back to the coast of Florida? Can't be completely ruled out. But would you say, Kay, that the National Hurricane Center have a very large cone? Do they actually think it will move slowly, or they're just not sure?
I think they will think it'll move. I think that they do expect it to move slowly, and I expect it to move relatively slowly as well. HWRF has it making landfall as a remnant low on day 5. So that's taking a long time to cross the Gulf of Mexico.
And that would be 2 storms this year that didn't make landfall in the Gulf, whilst being in the Gulf.
What would be the other one?
Well, a storm landfall, I should say. Come on, Marco didn't manage it.
Okay, the second landfall in the Gulf without producing tropical storm conditions on land.
Fair indeed. Does Teddy have the most amount of ace this year in the Atlantic?
Yes, it does.
So it still holds the
It's
record there.
well over 50% of the second highest.
Wow. And is Vamco rapidly intensifying right now? The answer, I think you'll find, is no. No signs of rapid intensification at this point, which is obviously good news.
Although it could begin at any point.
That's the bad news.
Yes.